We take the first Centurion tanks to Germany, we test them, and everybody starts liking them. We think this is going to be a really good tank. And coming on now is the last model of that Centurion as a gun tank in British service, the Mark 13. So why was this such an important tank for Britain? Well, one of the reasons is, as we made the tank, there was an awful lot of tanks in Europe at the end of the Second World War. These were passed on to other nations. But we're also now entering the time of the Cold War. The idea of the Eastern Bloc countries under Soviet domination, Warsaw Pact it was sometimes called, versus the capitalist countries of the West, NATO. That's why NATO is formed. And this terrible thought that our tanks compared to some of those tanks we've seen in things like the Berlin Victory Parade, tanks like the Russian heavy JS-2, 3, and we know they're building bigger tanks. What are we going to do about that in terms of firepower? Now for the British Centurion, we start with a 17-pounder gun. That's the one that was on the Firefly in World War II. We put it on the Archer tank destroyer. Very good, very powerful with the right ammunition. What was great about the Centurion is they realised as they're designing in World War II, up-gunning as it were is bound to happen. We're bound to need bigger guns, larger rounds, etc. So they designed the tank with that capability in mind. So within 5 years we've got the 20-pounder gun going on the Centurion. Weight of solid shot in steel that gun would fire. But there's still a worry. In the early 1950s, we've seen the T-34-85, we've now seen the T-54 tank. We are really worrying about what might come next in terms of the next generation, especially Russian heavy tanks. What's going to come along? What size gun? We're going to need a bigger gun to defeat that. That's the thought process that's going on. Why they start a program to get an immense 7.2-inch howitzer. Let's not have it lobbing shells in the distance. Let's have it as a direct fire weapon that can fire a round at a big, heavy future Russian tank. So they start a program of testing of how on earth we're going to get a gun that big onto a tank. Now coming on now is FE 4005, Fighting Vehicle 4005. They're given these numbers so that, again, rather boring, we want names, don't we? But these are so we can differentiate the different projects going on.
That's a fixed good.
It's not a tank. When you're looking at it, it's not something they're thinking is going to go into production. It's not a prototype, it's a test bed. In other words, they're setting it up to learn what are going to be the problems, what are going to be the issues. Now this is what they call stage 2 of the project. Stage 1 has an open top. They're trying to work out these rounds for that gun that size, 2-part ammunition. Round goes in, followed by brass case with the propellant in. They start by doing it with a loader assist system. It looks a bit like an auto loader, but they rotate the round behind the bridge and then the loader can push it in. This is phase 2, where they actually build a bit of a turret to see how big it's going to have to be to actually encase that gun if it was to go into production at all. And they do a couple of turrets for this. Many of you may remember, if you're my sort of age, when you first came here in the play area, this turret used to sit on its own, looking a bit sorry for itself. It's been restored, it's been dropped on the right type of Centurion hull, Mark 3, that it was being used. It went on a number of different hulls during experimental time, and it's obviously the biggest, by wow factor, the biggest direct fire weapon ever put on a tank. It was going to fire Hesh, high explosive squash head, plastic explosive basically inside a metal case, pancake on the side of the enemy, and causes massive damage inside by the shockwave. offside, you can only do certain angles. Too much recoil means you're going to tip the vehicle over. The great news for us is, we didn't realise it at the time, but Khrushchev, when he comes to power in the Soviet Union, he doesn't like the heavy tank program. He stops it. He says, you don't need those, you can do it with missiles. And also, in the mid-1950s, we start missile programs of our own, anti-tank missiles. So this FV4005 basically gets dropped because it's not needed in the same way. We've still got the threat of those heavy Russian tanks, but what are we going to do about it? So that was one of the British ways of looking at the problem. This is M103A2. That's what the Americans come up with as their answer to what they see that problem is. America pretty much gives up on the tank post-World War II until 1950, and then the Korean War comes along. And everybody realised, the Americans are thinking, don't worry, we've got stratofortresses, we can do nuclear bombs, etc., launch from aeroplanes or worst case submarines, etc. We don't really need tanks anymore. Korean War changed that. So all of a sudden they are trying to find tanks, literally taking them off M26 Pershings, off memorials, to go back into service, and they start new tank programs. We're going to see a couple of those in a moment. This one though is a heavy tank to hold a bigger gun to take on those bigger Soviet tanks. Now this is a project, in 1951 it's given to Chrysler, the head of Chrysler, a guy called Keller, he gives it to his son. They've got a brand new factory they built. The Americans liked the idea they did in the war, spread the military production around the place. Truman backed that. They then changed their mind and said we're going to go for specialist manufacture, only one or two. Unfortunately, Chrysler weren't the ones picked. So they built this great big new factory. They start making M47, M48 tanks in this M103, and they only have about 5 or 6 years, and then, terribly sorry, we're not interested in you anymore. That huge tank that they design is a real first in a number of areas. Huge casting for the turret. That's one big casting sitting on the top there. That turret is bigger than some of the whole tanks we saw driving around. Think of the Matilda 1. You could probably swallow that in that turret, it's that big. The gun, they've got the wartime biggest anti-aircraft gun they could get. It could fire a shell up to 60,000 feet. It was actually called the Stratosphere gun. They end up using that and think, let's have it in the anti-tank capacity. Again, instead of having to get shells up to high-level bombers, let's put it level, and we're going to fire with enormous force behind it at enemy tanks. So they managed to squeeze that in that M103's turret. Inside, 2 loaders are needed, because again you've got this such big ammunition they're going to have to fire there. They put it on this new hull. They finished making about 300 of them in about 1954, and they go straight in a shed. They've got so many problems, 98 remedies are needed to get that tank to work properly. Different reasons, sometimes because in the factory they took components from what they were making on the M47 and the M48. Didn't always work. They couldn't keep up with the stresses, the strains. The engine, first engine put in there, underpowered a bit, etc. The one we've got, M102, that's got a later engine put in from the M60 American tank to give it enough welling. So when they finally issue the M60, the M103 tank, they give them to the American Army, who really don't like them that much because they're so big. How do you transport them? They're still trying to work out the role they're going to play. In other words, do they sit on the hillside, they pick out the bigger Russian tanks in the distance, whilst your normal tanks, the M47s, M48s are in the foreground, the lighter tanks as it were. Will that work for them? And relatively quickly, by 1960, about 5 years, they drop it. And the US Army doesn't like it anymore. And if the US Army drops something, who picks it up? The US Marines. So it goes over to the American Marine Corps, and they keep it in service till about 1976. and our one here is part of about 150 the American Marine Corps use. Our one is in American Marine Corps colours, and it was given to us many years ago. I think I said this story before. A lot of people come here and said, oh, my dad served in this one, that one, or I served in your tank. This one, the American Marine turned up and he showed us inside where he scratched his name when he was one of the crew members. So that was going to be the answer to some of those bigger Russian tanks. It all is ruined by Britain again when we come along with a gun on that Centurion. 20-pounder, we see a captured T-54 briefly in the British Embassy compound in Hungary during the uprising. We measure the thickness of the armour on the T-54, we go away and say our 20-pounder gun on the Centurion is not good enough, we're going to have to get another one. So down at Radi in Kent, they design a new gun. That's the gun that you can see on this Mark 13 here, L7 105mm gun, firing, armour-piercing, discarding Sabo ammunition, better than this 120 gun on the M103. Now why that's important, we copied the Americans, their 120 gun, we put it on our Conqueror tank, same idea, whopping great tank, you can see one inside the museum, big cast turret, again this idea, watch out for the big Russian tanks. When we put the 105 on the Centurion, we have to take it out of service, no point having it. This gun is so much better, it's 50% better than the 17-pounder in World War II. Being able to penetrate armour. So it's got a tank. The Centurion tank was very good anyway, but it's suddenly let forward. Now that 107mm gun, we give it, we sell it to the Americans, they put it on their M60 tanks, they put it on the first M1 Abrams, so the Germans get it, they put it on their Leopard tanks. It goes all over the place because it's so successful, still in service. So again, one of those things where technology can bring an aging system, suddenly it's up to date in that way. And what we're going to see in a moment is, after Tim shows you some lighter stuff, later on we're going to see some of those Cold War tanks with these guns on, what they were up against, what they were going to be fighting against, and at the same time, a lot of them. So if you've got your earplugs, put them in for that next session. So there's our vehicles, they're heading off. Centurion Mark 13, by the way, lots of countries, we sold half the Centurion, brilliant for us in the 1950s, it brought money back in, lots of countries queued up to buy it. What ends up happening, we sell many on, they go all around the world, still in service at the moment with the South Africans, they call it the Oliphant. They've got, it doesn't quite look like that anymore, they add extra things to it, but obviously a post-war success for Britain with what in essence was a wartime tank. And still obviously the best looking tank here all day. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to hand you back to Steve and then we'll work out how we're going to do the next little bit for you when we walk to the track. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We've got more from David in a few minutes' time when we've got the arrival of the battle tank where we'll be seeing the fully restored M47. Always good to see the T72 as well, and of course one of my favourites, the Centurion Mark 13. Now, anybody here into YouTube? We've got some YouTubers here today. Yeah, we've got some. Yeah, that's good. Okay, well,